Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, request that proceedings under the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we have the nomination of Representative Ryan Zinke to be the Secretary of the Interior as the business before the body today, and I would like to spend a few moments this afternoon speaking about him, his qualifications, and why I feel he will be a strong Secretary of the Interior. Mr. President, really of all the cabinet level nominations that have an impact on my home state of Alaska, the Secretary of Interior is almost certainly the most important and the most consequential. 2/3 of Alaska, nearly 224 million acres, is under federal management. So to put that into perspective, that is more land than is occupied by the entire state of Texas. And it's an area about 177 times larger than the state of Delaware. And the vast majority of that land is controlled by agencies within the Department of the Interior, from the Bureau of Land Management to the National Park Service to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, significant parts of Alaska, more land than is occupied by the state of Texas, is held under federal management. So when you're in a situation like that, we really, in Alaska, we call this Interior Secretary our landlord. Might not necessarily like that fact, but he, in effect, is our landlord. And while it might sound strange if you're from an eastern state like Massachusetts or New York, which have hardly any federal lands within their borders, the decisions that are made by the Department of the Interior literally determine the livelihoods of thousands of Alaskans, as well as the stability and the success of our state. When the Department of Interior chooses to work with us, Alaska is able to grow and prosper, even as our lands and our waters remain protected under the most stringent environmental standards in the world. But when the department chooses not to work with us, as was all too often the case in the last administration, the people of Alaska suffer. Our state's economy, our budget, and our future are all threatened at the same time. And I start with that context to help the Senate understand why I take this confirmation process so seriously whenever a new Interior Secretary is nominated. I consider whether the nominee is right for the job and whether he or she will do right by the people of Alaska as well as the people of all the West. I talk with the nominee and ask him or her questions about everything from ANCSA and ANILCA to wilderness and wildlife management. And when I make a decision, I'm making it as a senator for Alaska and as the chairman of both the authorizing committee and the appropriations subcommittee for the Department of Interior. And so today, after a great deal of review and careful consideration, I am very pleased to be here to speak in strong support of our new president's nominee for this position, Representative Ryan Zinke. I believe that Representative Zinke is an excellent choice to be our next Secretary of the Interior. Maybe I'm a little bit partial here, but the fact that he is a fellow Westerner hailing from the treasure state of Montana, that helps with me. But he's a lifelong sportsman. He loves to hunt and fish. That also resonates with me. I also understand he's a pretty good downhill skier, and I like that too. He's a trained geologist. He's worked as an energy consultant. And even more notably, he's dedicated his life to the service of our nation, including more than 2 decades as a Navy SEAL, a term in the Montana Senate, and most recently as the sole U.S. Congressman for his home state. Representative Zinke's life and career have prepared him well to serve as Secretary of the Interior. Again, he was born in the West. He lives in the West. He understands it. He understands its people. He has substantive knowledge of the challenges facing the department and truly a firsthand experience in trying to solve them. He's also shown that he understands the needs for the department to be a partner, and to be a partner for Alaska and our western states, which again contain the vast majority of our federal lands. We had an opportunity in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee to hold a hearing to consider Representative Zinke's nomination on January 17th. It seems like an eternity ago now, but what I remember very clearly from that morning is the positive and very compelling vision that he shared with us. Representative Zinke told us that he grew up in a small timber and railroad town next to Glacier National Park, and he explained that he believes that the Secretary is responsible for being, quote, the steward of majestic public lands, the champion of our great Indian nations, and the manager and voice of our diverse wildlife. He really did show us, and spoke to it in the committee hearing, that he understands the purpose and the value of federal lands, invoking Teddy Roosevelt and pledging to follow the multiple use doctrine. Now, Mr. President, as other colleagues have come to the floor today to speak about Representative Zinke's nomination, several have spoken to the issue of the Antiquities Act and speaking more directly than to the issue of multiple use as it relates to our public lands. And in outlining, I think, the concept of multiple use that Representative Zinke believes and follows, it's probably best to look to his own words that he said when he was before us in the committee. On multiple use, Representative Zinke said the following: in multiple use, in the spirit of Roosevelt, it means you can use it for multiple purposes. I'm particularly concerned about public access. I'm a hunter, a fisherman, but multiple uses are also making sure what you're going to do, you know, and you go in with both eyes open. That means sustainability. That means it doesn't have to be in conflict if you have recreation over mining. You just have to make sure that you understand what the consequences of each of those uses are. It's our public land. What I have seen most recently is our access is being shut off. Roads are being shut off, and we're all getting older. And when you don't have access to hunting areas, traditional fishing areas, it makes it an elite sport. And I'm particularly concerned about the elitism of our traditional hunting, fishing, and snowmobiling, making our public lands accessible in the spirit of multiple use. Single use, if you look at the Muir model of some of our national parks and some of our areas, I agree. There are some areas that need to be set aside that are absolutely appropriate for man to be an observer. There are special places in our country that deserve that recognition, but a lot of it is traditional uses of what we find in North Dakota and Montana, where you can hunt and fish, you can drill an oil well. Make sure that there's a reclamation project. Make sure that there is a permit. Make sure there's NEPA. If you're doing something that's more intrusive, make sure you monitor the water. Everyone enjoys clean water, and we should. I don't think necessarily they're in conflict. I think you have to do it right. And I think it's important, Mr. President, to put those comments of Representative Zinke in the record, because it's clear that, again, he recognizes the many uses, the multiple uses of our public lands, and recognizing that there are certain places that are special, but ensuring that, again, that doctrine of multiple use is respected as initially intended. Representative Zinke also told us that he would have three main tasks if he is confirmed as Secretary of the Interior. The first, he said, is to restore trust by working with rather than against local communities and states. The second is to address the multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog at the National Park Service so that we preserve the crown jewels of our public lands for future generations. And the third is to ensure the professionals on the front line, our rangers and field managers, have the right tools, right resources, and flexibility to make the right decisions that give people a voice, to give a voice to the people they serve. So those were the three priorities as outlined by Representative Zinke. And I believe that all three of those missions are necessary. And I'm hardly alone in supporting Representative Zinke as the right choice to fulfill them. Within the committee, he drew bipartisan support when we reported his nomination to the full Senate on January 31. And he has drawn widespread support from dozens and dozens of stakeholder groups all across the country. From the Alaska Federation of Natives, the Blackfeet Tribe, the Choctaw Nation, and the National Congress of American Indians. Safari Club International, Ducks Unlimited, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, and the National Rifle Association. The Public Lands Council and the American Exploration and Mining Association. These are just a few of the many stakeholders that have praised or endorsed Representative Zinke to be our next Secretary of the Interior. So, Mr. President, I am glad that we're finally here today on the verge of confirming Representative Zinke to this position. And I would remind the Senate that despite many substantive differences, we confirmed President Obama's first nominee for Interior Secretary on Inauguration Day back in 2009. Not so with Representative Zinke. It's now been 6 weeks since we held his nomination hearing and almost a full month since we reported his nomination from our committee, again on a strong bipartisan basis. So I'm disappointed, of course, that it's taken this long to get to this point, particularly with regard to a nominee who I think by all accounts is not controversial or unqualified. Now we need to confirm Representative Zinke without any further delay so that he can select his team and get to work addressing the range of issues that he will inherit. From the Park Service's maintenance backlog to the need for greater balance in federal land management to life and death issues in remote Alaskan communities, and from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to U.S. affiliated islands, Representative Zinke really has his work cut out for him, and he needs to be allowed to get started on it as soon as he can. Again, I will repeat that I believe that Representative Zinke is a solid choice for this demanding and critical position. While we may not agree on every issue, I believe he will work with us in a thoughtful manner that is reflective of a true partnership. I believe that he understands what the job requires and that he has the experience necessary to succeed in it, and he will show that the Department of Interior can still work with local stakeholders to achieve positive results. I thank Representative Zinke for his willingness to continue his service to our nation and for his patience during this process. And on behalf of Alaskans, I look forward to working with him after he is confirmed with bipartisan support, and I would urge every member of the Senate to support his nomination. With that, Mr. President, I see that my friend and colleague from the great state of Alaska is here with us today, and with that, I yield.